On behalf of the Iowa Valley Community College District, it's my pleasure to present tonight's featured viewpoint speaker, Ms. Shere Hite.
Hello. It's nice to see you. I see you're all sitting in the back row. I'll give you a 5-minute idea of what I'll be talking about tonight, and then you can ask me any questions you'd like for a few minutes. The Hite Report is basically a trilogy. I'm working on the last volume of the trilogy, which is about women and love, and that will be published in 1986 sometime. I've been working on that for about 5 years. I started doing research on the first Hite Report in 1972. And each one seems to take about 5 years for some reason. The first study of women was published in 1976, and then I published a study of men in 1981, and then there'll be this study. The study of men included love and relationships. The first book didn't include love and relationships. The first study was basically about women's orgasms, because it seemed to me that society has said for a long time that women have a problem, which I usually put in quotes, having orgasm, and yet women don't have a problem having orgasm during masturbation. So why does society say women have a problem having orgasm? They mean having orgasm during intercourse or coitus. So in my study, it showed that 2/3 of women could have orgasm easily outside of coitus, but not during coitus. About 1/3 could have orgasm easily during intercourse. It was a great relief to a lot of women who read my book and wrote me after my book came out that they weren't unusual, and that in fact there was nothing wrong with them, but it was the definition of sex which had been pretty sexist for a long time, and the definition of sex that should change, that they didn't need to go for some exotic operation. That was basically the point of the first book. Also, women were talking about wanting to change the definition of sex and not focus it so much on intercourse or even on orgasm as far as that goes. Women were talking about wanting to have sex in a context of feelings. The second study I did of men covered not only sex, because I think although male sexuality is very limited by our society, still we know a lot more about it than we did about female orgasm, if you want to equate that with sex. I wanted to know about men's emotional lives because it seems we know so little about them. So I asked men, what is it like growing up male? And how do men feel when they fall in love? I think there was a song to that title, wasn't there? A rock song at one point. Anyway, most men said that they were brought up to stay in control, that the basic definition of masculinity was to be in control. So if a man then falls in love, he's apt to feel very out of control when he's in love. Many men would prefer then not to be in love or not to stay with that person than to continue feeling so out of control. Most of the men in my study didn't marry the women that they'd most passionately loved. Also, most men in my study, after being married 2 years or more, had extramarital sex. That also didn't make them particularly happy. This is part of the life cycle that most men in my study had, that I'll be talking about in the speech tonight. It takes a long time to describe in detail. The study that I'm working on now is related to how women feel about love. What kind of love is it best to base, if you want to get married, is it best to base marriage on? What's it like to be a woman who never gets married but falls in love? What about the double standard? Is the double standard still there, and does it interfere with how women can express themselves with men, etc.? Those are some of the topics of my third book. And after that, I will have interviewed 18,000 men and women and spent 15 years of my life doing it. So if you'd like to ask me anything about All of the above? I'd love to hear it. From the back row. Yes.
Is there a difference?
Well, you could say there was. I mean, if you could say sex is the act, as Ann Landers calls it, or you could say sexuality is various forms of physical expression. People use them interchangeably, though.
What difference has society brought us to right now as far as ego in sexuality or the performance of the sex activity?
Could you repeat that question?
Well, I think that the media and society itself has brought itself to a point where sexuality is in the forefront of almost everything, books, television, radio, almost everything. Has that helped sex or sexuality, or has it hindered it?
Well, neither one. Mm-hmm. I think that, none of us are particularly happy with seeing it all the time, but what is the it that we're seeing is the question. Women in my study were saying over and over they'd like to change the definition of sex or change the values surrounding sex. There seems to be a lot of pressure now for women to accept what in the past have been male, not biologically male, but male, culturally male definitions of sex and the values around sex. That is, yes, all hip chicks dress sexy and get guys to go to bed with them as often as possible. Most women don't really identify with that. But there certainly is a lot of pressure from advertisers and everywhere else to make those the new definitions.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you seen the results of the KFJB survey? Can you comment on those briefly?
I've seen some of them, yes. And I think it's a shame they gave them a fourth choice. They should have forced them to choose. How can you compare it with Ann Landers if they didn't have to choose, right? If they could say they wanted sex and affection, of course everyone would take that option. But I guess, when Ann Landers asked it, she asked about the act versus affection. By the act, one supposes she meant intercourse. But she could have made the choice, if a woman had to choose between clitoral stimulation to orgasm and tenderness, maybe the results would have been different. But so since she termed it in that way, there are many ways that the results could be interpreted. But it's quite clear that women are still saying what they said 10 years ago in my book. That is, they're not happy with the way sex is defined. What do you think the results meant?
Well, I haven't seen as much of the results as the gals that took the surveys, but it seemed like in our survey, 57% would prefer sex and affection, whereas in Ann Landers' survey wasn't like 90% that wanted.
No, but they didn't have that choice in Ann Landers. Ann Landers only had you had two choices. You're either going to get sex or affection. Nothing in between. Okay. And that's why I'm saying it's unfair to give another choice, because you can't then compare them.
Okay.
In the best of all possible worlds, of course, we'd all like to have, But that was, I think, what Ann Landers was trying to bring out, that because if sex did include affection most of the time, then people would have chosen the sex, right? Or the act, as she called it. Weren't you going to say something?
No.
Well, why don't you say something?
Well,
please. Yes.
Okay. Well, how come you started doing this years ago, as you're describing?
Well, I was in the women's movement, and in the women's movement, I had been in graduate school in history before that, modern history, and I was interested in history because I was interested in how the society got to the state it's at. So then, when I was in the women's movement, I was, we were working on equal pay and things like that, but we were talking about our personal lives. But there wasn't anything in the women's movement at that time which was dealing with gender orientations in personal life. Nobody was saying sex is sexist. And yet it just seemed quite clear when we were talking that it was. I mean, women were feeling very angry, annoyed, and all of that. So I decided to start asking questions. And I didn't think of publishing a book. I thought I'd do a conference. And one thing led to another. Took 5 years to do the first one. Cost a lot of money. And it was worth doing it.
Are you married?
No.
Have you ever been?
No.
Oh.
I might one day, although when I heard Gloria Steinem's comment the other day, they said, "Why aren't you married?" And she said, "I can't mate in captivity." So I thought that was such a great line. Maybe I should stay single so I could use it. But anyway, yeah.
What kind of reaction did you get for your first book? Did that encourage you to write the second book? Or did that discourage you necessarily?
No, well, the reaction was very positive, and women all over the world, it was published in 17 countries, were saying that they felt relieved to hear that there were so many other women who had things in common with them, because before that time, there hadn't been any books by women about sex. There were one or two female novelists who touched it vaguely, but nothing really that you could. And it's very hard to talk to your parents. Most kids can't. Or who are you going to talk to? You're going to ask the man in your life. And what does he know, after all? You know, having been brought up the same way we are, told, you know, gee, she's supposed to, you know, rear back like a racehorse when she comes. I mean, you know. So, anyway, there was a lot of support that I received after publishing it. But I started doing the questionnaires for the second book 2 years before I published the first book. So I just curious, right? Yes, somebody.
Some people have questioned the general overview of those who answered your surveys as being limited, and that is mostly white, middle-class, educated persons who responded. And do you feel that limits the results of your surveys in any way?
But you know, I should really sue whoever. I keep reading that in print, and I should sue whoever started it, because my statistical tables are all there. My statistical tables are so much better than Kenzie's, because Kenzie didn't even have any black people. I have not only black people, but I have Asiatics. I have every minority in the exact ratio that the U.S. population has them. And why they say that, I mean, how journalists can get away with the things they say is more than I know. But I couldn't sue that person unless I could show malice.
But, too, there's the fact that it was voluntary and people could respond to your surveys.
Yeah, but so were Kenzie's, and so was Masters and Johnson's. But, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And that
but just because they're voluntary doesn't mean they're all white middle class, you know.
That's true, but in your first book, you said that the majority of people who responded...
You read it? I'm so happy.
were...
I said what?
You said that most of the women who responded were white, middle class.
No, I never said... You find me the page, I wouldn't know. Of course, I didn't say that's ridiculous. It's not even true. You're getting that from reviews. You show me the page of the Hite Report that says that, and I'll give you a free trip to New York, because it ain't in there.
Okay.
Sorry. But anyway, having said that, what did you want to bring up about it?
Well, you answered the question. I guess people have compared you negatively to someone like Kenzie, who they say was more specific.
Some people compared me negatively.
To Kenzie. Well, many people have compared you positively to Kenzie.
Right.
But it has been brought out as a weakness in your books as scientific surveys.
But it's absolutely inaccurate. In fact, I'm giving a speech to the American Association for the Advancement of Science about my methodology, because it's a different methodology, but I honestly don't think that that's why my methodology was attacked by some people and lauded by others. I think it was that some men feel totally threatened by women standing up and saying, we would like to change things, guys. And I think it's as simple as that. And, you know, plus, I guess the first woman in any field who stands up, and especially in sex, you know, I mean, it's really a great way to make a reputation to attack that person. It's easy. You know, you can talk about almost anything. But the data gathering in that is really well done, I must say. And it's a pain in the neck to do, but it's very well done. Reporters who talk about those things understand so little that they make no differentiation between the methodology of gathering data, the methodology of presenting data, the methodology of compiling data. There are three distinct processes, and I can't even think of a review that was critical that made the distinction. To me, it's I don't know. It's sort of like women can't be scientific strain. Also, I'm sure I'm going to get more of that with my next book because it's about love. And love can never be scientific, they will say, somehow or another. And there was a psychologist a few years back who was given a grant from the government of $100,000 to study love. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And then Senator Proxmire said, "What is this?" And that's not a subject worth studying. So I don't expect to. I'm getting an award this year from the largest association of sex counselors in the United States. That's nice, but I'm sure I'm still going to be attacked. But I would prefer that people who attack me would discuss the issues than hide behind methodology. Because I feel it's like, mudslinging. Anyway. Yes.
Were you brought up in a home in which sex was freely discussed? You're obviously able to stand up in front of almost anyone and discuss these.
Khrushchev, he should have asked me.
It would be very difficult for most women, even now, to get up and use the terminologies and so forth that you do, with the complete confidence that you seem to display, obviously.
Yeah.
What was your home background? I mean, what really brings you to the point where you are now so free?
Actually, I was born in Missouri, which is not that far from here. And I lived with my grandparents most of the time, and they were very religious and went to a church that had the label Christian, which it was probably like Baptist, I don't know, something similar to that. And never talked about anything like this. It was really the women's movement that made me feel that the women's movement to me was what graduate school should have been, because you could talk about anything. That was really the whole feeling of that time period, at least in the 70s, when everything was up for discussion. No one was going to be looked down on. It was an idea of equality. All of those things.
Are men scared of you?
Let's take a vote. Probably. They're real silent in here, isn't it? Yes.
Do you see any changes towards the attitudes in sex in the future, then?
Yeah, I hope so. Well, I think there's been a lot of change in attitude towards clitoral stimulation, even though it's not now considered as one of our great cultural moments to give a woman clitoral stimulation by hand to orgasm. But at least it's accepted as an okay thing to do, whereas maybe 10 years ago, the woman would have, in most cases, felt she was deviant, or the man that, gee, maybe my penis isn't right for her. I think that's beginning to change. But the double standard isn't changing. That's a real problem. The idea that if women act too sexual or in their non-defined role as Mary, Mother of God, that somehow or another they're bad women. And I think you see a lot of that in the abortion issue, where people picket abortion clinics and then they yell at little 16-year-old girls going inside, "Murder us, murder us, you're murdering your child." I mean, where are the guys that are also murdering their child? After all, it's half theirs. And yet, there's this whole kind of movement, and the television, some of the television ministries push that double standard a lot. And they have these little half-hour dramas and, about girls who get abortions and imply that they have all the wrong values. I don't think abortion is the greatest answer to all of this. What my books have been about is trying to say, why do we have to define sex as intercourse and ejaculation into the vagina all the time? Why is that the definition of sex? And I gave a speech at the American Historical Association convention a few months ago, and with a panel of other historians talking about the fact that historically there have been other definitions. It's really the Judeo-Christian tradition that pushed that definition, and with the concurrent idea of virginity for women, because otherwise the man wouldn't know the child was his, and if you had to have the inheritance go through the man, then you have to have the woman being the pure vessel, quote unquote. All of those ideas separate men and women and make them hostile and suspicious and all of that. It's really unfortunate. Well, anyone else who'd like to enter the field here? This is your last chance. Unless you're coming tonight. Are you coming tonight? Probably not. You probably have to write your story, right?
Well, I'm not with the news media, but I'll ask one question anyway. In the news recently, there is a story about elementary children having sex, which, of course, a lot of people are aghast. I wonder if it was common and maybe just not known, or if this is truly unusual.
What do you mean having sex? Is that the case of the child molestation, or having sex with each other?
Two consenting elementary school children.
What were they doing?
From my information, they were having, or from my understanding, they were having intercourse in the boy's parents' house, as I recall.
How old were they?
Lois, do you recall? I don't remember. They're elementary.
They were elementary students.
One was 10.
They took them both to jail. And the boy was charged with rape, and the girl was charged with something similar. The legalities of it don't necessarily interest me. What I was interested in is, you spoke freely about children experiencing masturbation, adults, that it is common.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is in a way taking it one step further, and they're looking to another person for stimulation.
Yeah,
at a very young age. To me,
it's unusual for boys to be interested in intercourse coitus at age 10. That's a little early. Mostly girls masturbate earlier than boys do. So boys generally start masturbating just about a year before they can ejaculate. With girls, masturbation to orgasm happens maybe from, in some girls, 3 or 4 or 5. It starts very early, can start very early. It's kind of unusual to hear the story in that sense also, because it's much more typical for boys to go out and play with other boys and say, gee, I can, I've got this great thing I can do. I can jerk off and shoot over to there. Can you do it yet? That's much more typical than, to go and look for a heterosexual partner. So I'm curious what the circumstances were.
I don't think they really explained the circumstances.
Yeah.
The story was just about
it's
two married intercourse.
Been in the news the last 2 days. And,
yeah. Well, you don't know whether they, of course, if kids see pornography on the streets all the time, and this is the model of what they're told they're supposed to do, it wouldn't be surprising if a lot more start doing that. So I think the whole issue of pornography is a very important one, too. Do you have it on the street corner here?
Pornography?
Yeah.
Well, we have some store probably or two that you can go in and buy pornographic magazines and stuff.
But I mean, like Playboy and Penthouse, you buy them most any place, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so a kid any age can walk in and, get what passes for sex education, that is, sex indoctrination into a certain idea of what sex is by flipping through the pages, right?
Well, I think there would be an age limit that they would sell the magazine.
No, but come on, when they're selling jelly beans to, the 80-year-old in the corner, they're going to come over and say, hey, kid, you can't read that. They can all see it, or else in my studies, they get their father's copy. It's kind of shocking to me, the ages at which they start seeing pornography now.
Of course, that may be true if you have it in the home,
Well, if you don't, your friend's friend has it in their home.
But I don't think that if you went in a store and came up to the counter with, say, a child about 8 years old, came up to the counter with a Playboy magazine, that they would sell it.
No, but they don't want to buy it anyway. They just flip through it. I mean,
I'm not sure that they would even allow that.
Okay.
Because of the laws that are involved.
Yeah.
Limiting.
It's awfully hard to keep somebody from doing it. They can hide behind the Kleenex, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's all right. Talking about sex indoctrination, what about sex education in the public schools? Do you think that's adequately preparing boys and girls for sexual situations, or
not at all?
Not at all.
Not at all. But sex education hasn't changed much from what it used to be, which was teaching girls about menstruation, and now sometimes they throw in a word or two about birth control, and there's nothing. It's implied somehow or another through all of this that men have a natural sex drive towards penetration of the vagina. And real men, that is. If you're a real man, you have it. What?
Sex education?
Oh, sure. Because the whole focus on the vagina. They never talk about the clitoris or the fact that the kids could have oral sex and this has no consequences for anybody. But there's all this kind of hovering fear over the vagina, and they're constantly discussing it and showing diagrams of it, and
It's very biological. It doesn't deal with emotions very much.
Well, it doesn't, not biological either, doesn't deal with the clitoris. I mean, it just deals with this whole, it's the whole aura of grown-ups penetrate one thing into the other, kind of. It's the unspoken part of the message that really gets to you. And it gets to you so much you don't even know you have it. I mean, we assume. As Ann Landers called it, the act, and everybody knows what it is, right? But the second part of what you said, I kind of lost.
I guess I thought of it, whether they prepare girls for the fact that boys get horny at a certain age, talking about things like that. Preparing...
I don't think we should have to be prepared for anything. I think they should put the focus on you guys and prepare you guys for thinking another way. Planned Parenthood has this button. It says girls can say no, but it doesn't have a button to boys saying, why don't you do something besides intercourse for a change? It's just assumed there's this whole mystique about, boys will be boys and men will be men, and men will have extramarital, boys will be boys, men will be men. And I don't think that that's a biological definition of what men... look at Greek society. They had to urge men to have coitus with their wives often enough to reproduce. They were so busy having other kinds of sex. So, I'm not saying we should do what the Greeks did. I'm just saying that there is no... Our society's kind of, strike up the Marine band because here comes the man with his erection. And girls should all beware. That's a horrible scenario for men and women getting together in.
And you don't think it's realistic?
Well, realistic in terms of the society we're living in and it being typical, but it's not biologically based. It's culturally encouraged. But I think we're a long way from seeing any change there. So, well, have you had enough?
Yes, I think I'd like to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I hope you did get your questions answered, and that you'll be there tonight if you didn't have your questions answered.
Thank you. Bye.
Ooh.